Welcome back. Virginia's political establishment was surprised by Mark Herring's decision not to run for governor in 2017. Instead, the Commonwealth's Attorney General has decided he will seek a second term. WAMU 88.5 reporter Michael Pope covers Virginia politics and joins us now. Welcome back. Good to have you with us.
Thank you.
There's an assumption always, and not of course just in Virginia, but broadly, that if you're Attorney General, it means you want to be governor someday. Mark Herring has decided that day is not now.
Yeah, and that's news that was, shocking to a lot of people that were expecting to see a Democratic primary with Mark Herring and Lieutenant Governor Ralph Northam. So, one way of looking at this, Bruce, is that, the governor and, the role of the governor right now is kind of stymied if you're a Democrat, because you've got this Republican General Assembly that wants to stop you at every turn. The Attorney General, in some ways, has sort of more leeway. If you think about Mark Herring's time as Attorney General, you could make the argument he's been much more successful than Governor McAuliffe in sort of accomplishing a number of things. Right out of the box, he took a stand on gay marriage, that he would not enforce this, the gay marriage, the amendments to the Constitution, Virginia Constitution, on gay marriage. Also, this in-state tuition for undocumented students. Building standards for abortion clinics. He cited
huge issue.
Right. I mean, so those are three really big issues for Democrats that he was able to get significant movement on as Attorney General.
And sometimes knowing that you're in a good spot and not always climbing and striving and assuming that there's something better somewhere else, that is perhaps an overlooked part of politics and maybe life in general,
Yeah, then again,
ascending the ladder doesn't always put you in a better spot, even by your own definition of what better would look like.
That's true. However, I think most people are expecting him to run eventually. That's another piece of this, is that Herring's decision to run for re-election as Attorney General clears the field for Lieutenant Governor Ralph Northam to run and essentially win the Democratic primary. The expectation is that Herring would then run for governor after
Northam term.
Yeah, right. Either a Northam term or whoever ends up winning.
We've interviewed Lieutenant Governor Northam. He's an interesting guy. He's a physician, thoughtful, and not political. He doesn't have the personality type of the classic Paul. He's about as different as Terry McAuliffe. Let's put it that way. He's about as different from Terry McAuliffe as you could get. Do Democrats think he can ignite the electorate, that he can excite people? Because he's going to have formidable opposition, we believe.
Well, as you know from talking to him, he speaks, you can hear in his voice that he's kind of an authentic Virginian, I guess, is one way to put that. He's got an accent, right, from a part of the state that Democrats need to win in. And you say he's sort of polar opposite from Terry McAuliffe in the sense that people don't really think of him as being partisan. But let's remember that as Lieutenant Governor, he breaks a tie here in the Senate. And so there have been, like if you think about this recent special session, Northam broke the tie in favor of this very unusual and controversial move to adjourn the Senate sine die, even though the House had not adjourned. And so Republicans are ready to make the case that Northam is a partisan figure.
And I didn't mean simply in partisan terms that Northam is not the classic Paul. I think part of it is he's cerebral, he's thoughtful, he doesn't plunge into a crowd. He's a little bit maybe like Maryland's Lieutenant Governor, who is not a gregarious guy by nature. I wasn't going as deep as you were. I was thinking much more superficial.
Yeah, he has a low profile, though. I mean, that's another thing, is that the things I was talking about Mark Herring earlier, and these sort of major victories for Democrats, those all grabbed headlines and got Herring a lot of sort of visibility that Northam doesn't really have.
Ed Gillespie, the former chairman of the Republican National Committee and an aide to former President George Bush 43, he stunned just about everyone by coming within a whisker of knocking off Virginia Senator Mark Warner. It's expected now that he will run for governor in 2017. Does he carry the momentum from his last run into the next one?
What's really interesting about that last run is that he ended up losing the race, but it was so close that he ended up coming out of that looking sort of like a victor. And so he really set himself up for a potential run for governor, although he also said right after all of that that he had no plans on running for governor. No plans doesn't mean he's not going to do it, of course. Let's not forget State Senator Mark Obenshain, who also came within a whisker of winning the Attorney General's race. In fact, there was a recount with Herring. So he's also been setting himself up for a potential run for governor. So I think it's likely that we would see some sort of contest between Obenshain and Gillespie on the Republican side.
Do we know if Gillespie is warming to the idea? Is he closer to a candidacy now than he was the night he lost to Mark Warner, or the days after that?
Well, so the days, it actually took some time, because if you'll recall, there was no winner on the night of the election. You sort of had to wait, because it was so close. You sort of had to wait a little while for Gillespie to concede defeat. And then let's remember that after that, he said that he wasn't really interested in running for governor, or at least he had no plans for it. So right now, we sort of have a big question mark next to Gillespie's name. Obenshain, on the other hand, is definitely interested.
There will be pressure on Gillespie to run, because the history of the last several cycles tells us that when Republicans have a good candidate, a centrist, they do very well. When they don't, they don't. You look at Bob McDonnell, who parachuted in. You look at Jim Gilmore, who seized on a great issue and was and performed very, very well. It makes a difference. It always makes a difference. But I mean, in Virginia, it really makes a difference who emerges from the GOP pack.
Sure, and Gillespie has this deep background of running campaigns, and obviously he ran a very well-run race for United States Senate. He lost that race, it's important to remember. However, that was also his first time as a candidate, too. So now that he sort of got that behind him, he could really run a very, he could really be a serious contender for the governors.
Talk, if you would, Michael, about the weekend news out of the city of Alexandria, which you cover closely, where the current mayor has decided he's in as a write-in.
Very unusual situation. So what happened is the current mayor in Alexandria, the incumbent Democrat Bill Ewell, lost the primary back in June to Allison Silberberg. She's the vice mayor. So when voters go to the polls on November, they will see one name on the ballot, Allison Silberberg. There will be no other name on the ballot for mayor. Ewell has been persuaded by his supporters to run as a write-in candidate. So voters can go and write his name into the polls. Now,
just as they could write in your name or my name
or Donald Duck. I mean, this actually happens every election cycle. You get people writing all kinds of things in. So, it's also interesting that we are not going to know on election night who won, because of the mechanics of how this works. I was just interviewing the folks at the registrar's office this morning about sort of the details about how the write-in candidacy works, and while the election officials will be sort of transposing letter by letter each write-in vote, it won't be until the next day when the electoral board actually counts them.
But let's talk about the politics. Why is Ewell doing this, other than a desire to remain in office? He opens himself up to the complaint of sour grapes.
Sure. So if you think back to the June primary, it was a three-way race between the incumbent mayor, Bill Ewell, a former mayor, Carrie Donnelly, and the vice mayor, Allison Silberberg. Donnelly and Ewell essentially had the same position on development, and so,
gotcha.
The one argument is they essentially split the vote among people who like the waterfront development, who like the scale of development on the west end of the city, whereas Allison Silberberg had all the people who are critical of that kind of development, mostly in Old Town, to herself, and was able to sort of beat the opposition by splitting it.
I was in Alexandria over the weekend, and if you're not there every day, if you're only there occasionally, and you look around and there are these buildings that weren't there before, it's striking. Not to take a position, but it's transformative. It's an amazing thing.
It's changing rapidly, including on the waterfront. When I went to the mayor's launch event, I drove by the old warehouse that had once housed the Art League. That has been demolished. It will soon be a hotel. So, I mean, we've got rapid change in Alexandria, especially on the waterfront.
It's amazing stuff. Michael Pope covers Virginia politics for WAMU 88.5. Always great having you here. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.
Good to see you. Have a good week. And when we return, the Nats stumble against the Mets. Elliott Smith joins us after this.